So in here, this is a character rig. Okay, these are available from Creative Crash. You can go to their website, you can download rigs, and you can play with them. This is one that's been professionally set up. This kind of setup is something that takes a long time to do. And sometimes it takes a team of people to do this kind of setup because it's so intensive. It's not just basically going in there and clicking a bunch of buttons inside Maya. Sometimes it's scripting, sometimes it's just different things. Okay. This object is a soft object, okay, meaning that it has some sort of deformation to it. So if I go in here and I grab this box by the wrist, and I grab the blue arrow and I move it, you see how they're deforming a little bit. This is a solid piece of geometry, okay? If we had a regular solid piece of geometry, like a cylinder, and even if this had a bunch of divisions, in order for us to bend this piece of geometry, we have to go into the vertices here and then rotate these and move them, and then grab the next ones and rotate them and move them. Okay? This whole process eliminates that kind of stuff. By doing this, we're able just to kind of move a box around to move that whole hand where we want it to go. We're able to grab this circle, and in this circle are a bunch of custom attributes. There's index, there's middle, there's ring, and I'm able to go in here and middle drag on any one of these or change their values in order to get a different value inside there. Okay, in order to deform that finger sound. Yes, it is. Now, as a rigger, your job is to understand what the movement is going to be of the character and then apply those constraints to your character and apply the ability for your animator to move the character. So, for instance, this character, because it's a free rig, they don't know what people are going to do for it. So they left it pretty much wide open. They gave it a whole lot of controls and a whole lot of freedom of movement. Okay? But if this was a real character in a real movie, there's no way that we would need the character to be able to bend their finger back like this. Okay? So that's something that as a rigger they would stop. They would say, okay, well, the limitations of a pinky finger is only so far. And realistically, most of that movement is coming from here. This middle knuckle doesn't move very much. The tip moves a little bit more, okay? So they would set those things up, okay? Now, being a rigger, you also have to be able to understand what kind of stuff is happening to the human body as you're doing this kind of stuff. So as you're bending your thumb, and everyone does this every semester, is that they think the thumb only bends in 2 spots. It bends in 3 spots, okay? You have the major part right here, you have this part, and then there's another knuckly part right inside the hand. So you actually have 3 areas your thumb can bend from. The other area people don't think about is how many different areas or how many different directions the thumb can rotate in. Your regular finger can rotate like this, okay? Each one of these knuckles can go like that. And then this base part only can go side to side, okay? So I just do this. I can kind of go side to side with it, okay? I can't twist it, even though I can twist it a little bit. I can't just physically just go in there and twist it without me grabbing my finger and rotating it. So when they're creating the thumb, they understand how far the thumb can kind of twist in here, how the thumb can spread and move, how the thumb can reach this way or that way, and how each one of the knuckles of the thumb can curl in. Okay? Your shoulder, you may not know this, but this is about as far as your shoulder can rotate. Your shoulder does not go any higher than that. What happens is, if you're standing here like this, that's as high as my shoulder rotates. If I want to go any higher, my collarbone takes over, and that's what's rotating it up. Okay? If my collarbone didn't move, I couldn't move my shoulder up any further than about that. So on this rig, that's why they have a collarbone here, so you can create that motion. Okay, and then also create this of that arm coming up. When we have the neck here, this can rotate around too. Now you see there's not a whole lot of control around the neck area. Our neck and spine are actually composed of a bunch of different bones. And each one of those bones can rotate, or rotate at least a little bit, and allow us to move some. So in this case, they don't have a whole lot of control around the neck or the spine just because of the amount of movement that there actually is. Okay? So they just created a base line for, this is about good enough movement. Okay. Also, you'll notice that the spine rotates from the back as opposed to the center of the body. That's how the spine works. There's also, in this one, there's controls for rotating the spine from here. I could also grab the circle and rotate it. And I can also grab the circle and move it if I want to do any stretching. Okay, so I can move this one. I can, that one doesn't let me rotate. I can rotate this one. I can rotate this guy. I can rotate, oops. Oh, that's the only one there. Okay. There's one for the hips. So I can rotate and move this one. And you see how it's moving the legs as well. If I just grab the circle, there it is, this one just rotates the hips. So it has a lot of control in there because certain things we have to kind of lock down and kind of limit ourselves as to what we're doing. If our character is grabbing onto a handrail, we don't want the rest of the body moving if he's supposed to be holding onto the handrail. Or we don't want the hand to move if he's holding onto the handrail. We want that to be locked in. So a lot of these things that are on these rigs are things to help us control that kind of stuff. Certain things like this, okay, the elbow's here, I want the elbow to point down more. So I have a control here, I can point the elbow down more, or I can point it up. Okay, or I can move it here. Okay, and the same thing goes for the legs. Here's the foot controls, I can move it up, oops, move it over, I can rotate the foot, I can control some of these attributes. Okay, there's also stretching, so I could actually have this thing stretch. Obviously you wouldn't go that far. Maybe like that you might go, or like that. Okay, so I can have some stretching in there too. So a lot of this that we're going to be doing is creating attributes and connecting them to things to make things move automatically without us having to physically go in there and grab the vertices or grab the individual objects and move those objects. So far I haven't grabbed any physical objects. All I've done is grabbed these little controlling objects, okay? And these are just simply curves. We can make them whatever we want. And each rigger is going to have their own different kind of setup. If I go to Creative Crash's website, no, they're bones. We haven't gotten to that yet, but yes, there are bones inside here that are moving things around, but they just don't show those. Okay, if I look inside here, you can see there's little joints of where the bones would be. Okay, we'll get into what those actually are. A rigger's job is to make sure that the animators can do their job without breaking it or without having to do a whole bunch of extra work. So this is Creative Crash. These are all their character rigs. Some of these are free, as you can see here, and some of these are pay ones, as you can see here. So if you really wanted the Batman rig to play with, there you go, then you could download the Batman rig and play with it. Okay? And like I said, depending on the character and depending on the controls, they have different things. So in this case, the Batman rig, it looks like, I've never downloaded this, it looks like it might have some cape controls that you can adjust. It might just be the way they have it shown. Okay? Usually they have a video you can also watch that shows some of their controls. Little monkey animation rig. That's not the monkey. I'm going to just do a search for the monkey rig. There he is. Raffi the Bad Monkey. This guy, he has controls not only for his face, for his arms, for his legs, he also has controls for his tail and for his ears. Okay? I don't know if that's the same one. I think it might be this one, NT Monkey. There is an Elvis rig. Oh, apparently not on this website anymore. This one is a pretty cool rig, but it's a pay one. Very human-like. Okay. Coming back to the Andy rig, that's what this one is, the Andy rig. This one actually has different controls for what the Andy rig looks like. So if I come over to, not gonna be there. If I come over here, I can change what Andy's hair looks like. So I can make it a boy haircut. Or I can make it a man's haircut or a woman's haircut, or give it no hair. I can give it a boy's chest or a girl's chest. I can give it a different color vest. I can turn the face sliders on, the face controls on. I can make it a rough version of this. And I can come in here, let me hit Alt-B so you can see this, and I can use these to control how the mouth is working. Oops. How the lips are working. That one doesn't want to work. How the eyebrows are working. Some of these are not working because my texturing is not up to its highest setting. Oops. And this one's going to make it not work. Oh, never mind. That's why. Because I set it to low quality down here, let me set this to smooth. And maybe we can get some of these to work. There we go. So that one's working. And then the eyebrows are working also. And this one's working. Okay, so this is, like I said, lots and lots of months setting this up. Okay. There's the tongue, if we can see the tongue move. There it is. Okay, and then there's even individual face controls that I could manually move to tweak how the character is looking. And if you ever saw any of the behind the scenes stuff for Pixar, they'll go into each one of these controls and tweak every single character, every single frame to get it to look exactly the way they want it to look. They don't go in there and say, well, this is good enough. They go through, like I said, every frame to make sure that they have the exact look that they want on their characters. Okay, but it all starts from just understanding some very basic stuff, and that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to show you the file that we're going to be working on. And if you want to, you can copy it to your computer now, because we'll be working on it in a little bit together. So on Resources 2540 Rigging, there's a robot rig. Just copy it to your work folder. Yeah, copy the whole folder to your folder, to your work folder. All right, this is the scene that we're going to be working on for rigging, okay? As a rigger, if your job is just to rig, typically you don't animate. Typically someone has modeled something and then they give it to you and your job is just to rig it, and then you'll pass it off to someone else who would be the animator. Around the Detroit area, you don't really have that luxury. You're just a jack of all trades. So in here, there's several things that we're going to be animating. Let me turn my stuff on. Oh, it's minimized. There we go. Okay. So if I take this and I'm just going to hide all this stuff here. Okay. So we'll start with the door mechanics. So for the door mechanics, there's a little thing on the door, right there, a little access panel. This panel is going to slide up like so. And then our person is going to punch in some secret code. Okay, so whatever that happens to be. So we're going to be animating these things. The door sliding open. We're going to animate each one of these buttons pushing in and then pushing out. Okay. And then there's going to be a little electricity thing that kind of shoots down each one of these pipes and goes into this box. In this box, this is like the motor housing. That's what kicks this hydraulic thing on. And then this little piston is going to be spinning around, which is going to turn this gear, which is going to turn this gear, which is going to turn this gear, which turns this whole thing, which slides this thing across like that. Okay, and then that's what's going to open up the door. Okay, and right here is the door it's going to open. And then when this door opens, nothing right now, but there he is. There's the robot we're going to be rigging. Okay, now it's going to seem like a daunting task. Okay, but it's a lot of repetition. Okay, it's a lot of doing the same kind of thing that you just saw in the other rig, but it's going to be on this guy. So we have a hand here, and I've actually built it so that it's pretty self-explanatory as to how these things can move. So you see this thing here, it can only move in this direction. It can only rotate like that. Okay, it can't rotate like this, otherwise it would break. Okay, so it's pretty self-explanatory as to how these things can move because it's all just sockets. And in some of these areas like this, you'll see that it just has a little joint there that can obviously spin around in several directions if we needed it to. Same thing with the wrist here. This here at the elbow, we have the same kind of thing. It's basically your elbow is locked here. It can go like this up and down, but it can't go sideways and it can't spin around. When we do this, this isn't our elbow twisting, this is our wrist twisting. And we have two bones in our arm, and when we twist, those two bones are like this at first, then they just kind of cross over each other. That's why we can't go any further than as far as like that-ish. Okay. There's also some wires here that we'll have to rig as well. We don't want the animators to have to come in later, and the animators are going to be you also. We want the animators to have to come in later and grab those individual points and animate those things when the arms move up and down. So we have to automate that feature. So we have to automate when this arm is bending that those wires will go along with it. That on, make sure I get the right side. On this side, they're going to compress, and on that side, they're going to stretch out. Okay, so we have to make sure that all those things are set up. Here's our shoulder. Here's our collarbone. If I come inside here, you can see where the collarbone is going to rotate from. There's the neck, and here's the spine area. And you can see each one of the spine areas is basically the same kind of thing. It's just the socket, and this thing is going to spin like that with all of this stuff on it. Okay, we have some leg joints, basically the same thing as the arm joints. And then we have our head joint also. Now we also are going to have some interior lights and some exterior lights. And we're going to be rigging those as well. That's what we're going to try to get accomplished today, is to just set up a control so that we can animate the light intensity going on and going off. Okay? That way we can show a little bit of coming into our scene, it's a little bit dark, and then our lights are coming up. And then when the doors and the access panel gets turned on, the door opens, then these lights kick on. Also, the lights on this guy are going to kick on like they're powering up. That's what we want to have. Okay, and each one of these things is a separate shader. So anywhere you see these blue, each leg is the same one. Like this one and this one are the same shader. That's the same shader as itself. This one and that one is the same shader. This one and the one on this side are the same shader. And there's also ones that are inside the spine too. Okay? So we're going to animate all of these things kind of powering up, and then that'll be the end of it. Okay? Now that doesn't seem like a whole lot of stuff, but this is going to take some time to do. All of these things have their own way of setting this up. We're going to be going through a very basic setup on our rig. It's not going to be anything crazy. The Andy rig, like I said, would take months for someone who's experienced in rigging to do. As we're beginners, we're going to go with a very basic setup on all of our stuff. Okay? Even though I'm saying basic, you're going to think I'm nuts and you're going to think that it's super complex. Okay? But trust me that it actually is a very basic setup. Especially because we're not dealing with anything really soft inside here that increases our workflow or speeds up our workflow a lot. Okay? All right, so now to go through some of the foundational stuff of what rigging is, it all starts with these guys here. Okay, under the animation, under skeleton, we have what are called joints. And if I turn my grid on, there we go. If I turn my grid on, I have a single joint, okay? A joint is nothing. It's just a way for us to visually connect things together. That's all it is, okay? So if I click and create a joint, then I create another joint, and then I create another joint, you can see how these things are appearing to be connected to each other, and they are connected to each other. If I grab this joint and move it, it's rotating this here, okay, or it's moving that there. If I grab this joint and move it, it's going to grab all of them. Think of this kind of like your own body, okay? You have a center point of your own body. The pelvis area in your body is typically where we put this center point, where we put this controlling joint. Because if this one joint is going to move, basically everything else is going to move. I can stand here and move my arm and nothing else is going to move. I can move my leg and nothing else will move. But if I move my hips at all, a lot of my body is going to move. Okay, my legs are going to move, my upper body is going to move. So typically this joint here, which is called the root joint, will end up somewhere on the pelvis area of your character. So we lay our characters out. I'm just going to do a very basic setup just to show. But we basically lay this out as here is our pelvis, our center point, and then here is our leg. Okay, there's the knee, there's the ankle, there's the ball of the foot, there's the toes. Okay, and then over here, I'm going to lay out where the spine would be. Something like that. And then I'll go to a top view. And then over here would be like the collarbone. And then we would have the shoulder bone. And then we would have the elbow and the arm. And then we would have, this is the wrist, elbow, wrist. And then we would have this, where this would branch out into each finger. Okay, I'm not going to draw each finger right now. Okay, so basically this is kind of what our skeleton would look like on one side. I'm just going to flip this over just so it doesn't look weird. Mirror joint, there we go. YZ. There we go, okay. So basically, if you've ever seen any of those Jim Henson things where they have like an armature, they have a wire set inside of their model where they just have clay wrapped around it. This is kind of like what we're doing, is we're creating this little wire setup here so that when we want to grab the shoulder and rotate it, we can rotate the whole arm, okay? Because typically, if you're going to take the shoulder and rotate it, that whole arm is going to go with it. Your arm just doesn't stay still for the rest of it, okay? If I grab the hips and I move the hips over here, the whole body goes. Okay, or if I move it forward or backwards or whatever, it's all going to go. If I grab the spine joints and rotate them, you can see how they're all kind of rotating together. That's what they should be doing. If I grab the elbow and rotate it, that's going to happen there. Okay, so we're going to build an armature inside of our character that's going to be controlling all of these different attributes. Okay. So let me just set this guy on a new layer so I can turn him off. Oops, strip tool. All right, so here are some joints. I'm going to go into the outliner and take a look at this. This is joint 39 right here. I open this up, there's joint 40, joint 41, and so on, all the way down to whatever my last one is, joint 48. Okay, you can see how these things are laid out. These are basically parented. The last joint that I clicked is parented to the 47, it's parented to 46, it's parented to 45, 44, all the way to 39. So what that means is that if I move any of the parents, everything below it is going to move with it. Okay, so if I grab this and move it, it's going to move everything. If I grab this one and move it, everything below it is going to move. If I grab this and rotate it, everything's rotating. Now here's where joints, especially like in a snake or your spine or in something of this nature, I grab all the joints individually and rotate them. Now I can start getting stuff that's like curly happening. Okay, so if this was a dog's tail, that's how we could rig a dog's tail, by creating a bunch of joints in it and creating this nice smooth motion. Okay, and let me just create a cylinder. Okay, now if I take this cylinder here, okay, and I want these cylinders to move when I do that. What I can do is take the cylinder, shift-click the joint, and parent it to it. Take the cylinder, shift-click the joint, parent it to it. See, this is very monotonous, very just same thing over and over again. Good. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can grab the joints again. And I can rotate them, and now you'll see that the geometry is now rotating with the joints. Okay, this is what we're going to be doing for our entire robot rig, is we're just going to be creating joints, parenting pieces of geometry, and then creating some sort of control. As an animator, I don't want to have to go in here every time and click on every single one of these joints. That's a waste of time. So a rigger would go through and create a control. And I can use my CV curve tool and just draw like whatever this. There we go. Anything at all. I can create my own attribute by going here and giving it a name. Rotate joints. And then what I can do is use what's called the set driven, and we'll get into this part today. I'm just setting a couple things, and you'll see what I can do with this. Alright, so now I have this. I have my rotate joints here. And by clicking and dragging on that, by changing those values, I can manipulate this whole thing. So I don't even have those joints selected anymore. I just have this thing selected, and this thing has a control, and I'm able to manipulate this by just doing that. Okay, and you'll notice that I can't go any farther. Even if I pump this up to 500, it doesn't go any further. I've set my control from 0 to 100. So when this is at 0, this thing's flat. When it's at 100, it's curvy, and that's it. It won't go any further. If I go negative, it doesn't do anything. As a rigger, I have to tell it what I want it to do and when I want it to do that. Yes, sir?
Is there anything that a bend deformer can do, but like that way it wouldn't be able to do?
Well, the bend deformer wouldn't allow me to do other types of things to this without having several. With this kind of control, I could also create a rotation up and down too. And I can also move this around a lot easier. I can still move this wherever I want. And this thing can just stay wherever it wants. Oops. And then this will still work. Okay? And then if I use a bend deformer, it wouldn't work for individual objects like this. The bend deformer has to have one big object with a lot of divisions so it can bend it and twist it. This, being separate objects, allows me to do that kind of thing. Okay?
Would you have to make multiple cylinders to do that? Or can you do that with one long cylinder, what you just did?
For what I just did, I need multiple cylinders. Okay, if I had one cylinder there, only one cylinder could be parented to one object at a time. Let me bring it back. There it is. Okay, that was a good question. If I had one cylinder here, I'm just going to duplicate this and scoot it over. Okay, I duplicate one object, I get the whole thing. Okay, if I take this one object and I put it on here, I can parent it to any one of these. And it rotates and moves with it. But if I grab anything in the middle, you'll see that it doesn't move with it at all. It just stays exactly there. Even if I grab multiple ones of these and rotate, I'm not getting any of that motion because it's just parented to this guy here. It's just parented to that one. So when this one moves, it'll move. When this one rotates, it'll rotate.
So what does skinning do that makes that different? When I do dragging, it's one solid mesh, and I put a bunch of bones and it curves.
Right, and that one's skinned though. Okay, so what that allows us to do, I'm going to put in some divisions here. It's a edge loop tool, multiple. Now, in order for us to get this thing to deform, we have to do what's called skinning. So I can grab the joint here, shift-click my geometry, and skin it. There's a couple different skins. I'm just going to go to rigid bind because that's the easiest one. And there we go. And now I can grab this, and now it'll deform the object. Before, the other one wasn't deforming it. It was just moving the pieces. Now this is actually deforming it. And this will get you into a different area that you have to play with, because now you have to go through and tweak how each of these little deformations are looking. Yes, sir?
What would a smooth bind be as opposed to a rigid bind?
The rigid bind is typically used when you can just get away with it. Typically, like a video game would use a rigid bind because it doesn't have to be as accurate. If we go to this here, and I bend this in, and pretend that this is your leg. Your leg was straight and now it's bent, and you've just lost your whole backside of your leg.
Yeah.
Okay? A smooth bind, you can fix it. You can go through and actually create bulging deformers to make it look like that skin is now puckering out or bulging out because the skin is pushing together, the muscles are pushing together.
Is that what painting weights does?
That's what painting weights does. That's part of what painting weights does. With a rigid bind, we have to fake it, and we fake it by using other tools. You see the smooth skin, it's more accurate. You can do a lot more with it, a lot more setup. With the rigid bind, there's only a couple things at selected joints. So this is kind of a way to fake to correct that. See, it doesn't really do that great of a job, okay? But it's still an option. But typically for video games, they don't need this level of detail. They don't need to see that because a lot of times it's very dark or it's in spots you don't see. The calculations, as far as when you're working with video games, you're working with real time. They have to be able to do stuff quick. So that's where we would use this because it's much quicker. A smooth bind can take forever for it to calculate because of how intense the math is behind it, how much different stuff you can have set up on it. Okay, because they're the smooth bind stuff is used. Okay, smooth skinning and rigid bind, and I've never played with the interactive skin bind, but that's the newer one. These are used. It's just that around Detroit, the harder ones are used typically more. Okay, because you're typically not going to be rigging a character around here. Typically, you're going to be rigging a car or a piece of machinery. A long time ago, a student graduated from here. He got his first job doing car modeling, animations, and renderings, and his first job was to take a what's it called? A convertible, and animate the convertible going up and then coming back down. And if you've ever seen the geometry or the mechanics of a convertible top, it's a whole lot of stuff going on. There's a whole lot of different things pivoting here and there and everywhere. That might be a good thing. Or this. Okay, it's not just like this thing rotating here. There's like 17 different pulleys and rotations and controls inside the car that are making that convertible top come up and go over. Okay, so for him to animate something like this right off the bat, it would be no big deal. He animates it one time, but what happens if they want to make changes? What happens if it goes too slow or too quick or whatever? By rigging it first, he has control over it. He has one slider to open the convertible top and one slider to close the convertible top. Okay, So that's, as a rigger, that's where our focus is to be able to control a whole lot of different things from one spot. That's what our goal is, or from as few spots as possible. You may have seen in the visor, they have these motion capture examples, and if I drag one of these guys in, I'll even drag the fighting one in. There we go. Okay, so somewhere, there he is. There's this guy, and as I hit play, he moves around. Okay, there is no rigging done to this guy. Okay, there's no rigging done. This is motion capture, and with motion capture, all they do is they set up ping pong ball type things on a real life person. Yeah. They videotape him, and then that data is brought into the computer. Okay, so with that, it's basically saying, okay, well, here is one of those balls where one of the balls would be. Here's where another one of the balls would be. Here's where another one. Here's where another one. Here's where another one would be. Okay? So this is telling it, it's just feeding that data into Maya as to where each one of these joints should be. So motion capture typically doesn't need a rig because of it's just doing the exact joint animation. But as an animator, you have more controls over this. If you look, this guy doesn't have a hand. Okay, it's just a glove, which, you know, is fine for what this thing is, but it's not a hand. They can't do hand motion capture stuff because it's too fine of a detail. They actually have separate motion capture stuff just for hands. They have separate motion capture stuff just for like the face animation stuff. Sometimes they'll even go through after this and they'll go through and tweak some of these things. So they might raise the leg a little bit higher or bring it down a little bit more. So for a motion capture, typically there's not a whole lot of rigging done to it because all the animation is done from computers. Okay, it's done from videotaping and processing that data. But this kind of stuff that we're doing, this rigging stuff, is all going to be based on the fact that we are going to be doing the animation. We are going to be going in there and setting our own keyframes. Okay, typically that's how it's done, unless you have $250,000 to spend on a rigging or on a motion capture suite for animating people. Okay, and most people won't do that because you can actually just go out there and buy motion, spell stuff right, motion capture data. Okay, you can actually buy stuff, and this is Carnegie Mellon. They have like free stuff that you can download, free motion capture data you can download. But there's other places that just sell it. Like I need, 100 people walking, or 5 different walk cycles, and they'll send 5 different walk cycles to them. Okay. But because we're in Maya, we're setting our own keyframes, we're animating our own characters and objects, we have to have those controls to do that. Okay? So what we're going to do together is we're going to set your project to the robot and then open up the robot rig file. Robot with door start. All right, so what we're going to do in here is we're going to rig a couple of these things. Now, every rigger is different, okay? I rig my stuff a certain way. Once you have more experience doing it, you may find your own workflow that you decide you like better, okay? So what I like to do is I like to put as many things that are just going to be automated, just kind of like straight shots, like this door opening left to right or right to left, this way, right to left, is kind of like a straight shot. There's no like guesswork to it. It's basically going to start at one point and end at another point. This thing coming up is going to go from the bottom to the top. These lights are going to start at one point and go up to a higher value. Okay? All these door mechanics are all going to be at one value. Okay, it's not going to be like I have any really artistic control over how each one of these things are going to move, because if this thing is rotating, it has to rotate this one, and then that has to rotate this one, and that has to rotate this one, which causes all this stuff to move and work and whatever. Okay, so I like to take all of those kinds of controls and put them on one master control in my scene that I could then animate from one spot. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a master control. So under Create, go down to Text option box. And then just type in a letter that doesn't have any weird like broken characters, like lowercase I, there's a body to it, then there's a dot, that's a broken character, don't do that. So I'm just going to do M for master character. You can just do M if you just want to play it safe. Okay, and then we're going to hit Curves and then hit Create. Okay, so what that gives us is it just gives us the letter M. That's all we wanted. Okay. Now this is an area where we can just kind of move this letter M just somewhere in our scene, just so we can see it. Okay, and then we'll also rename it to be master control for the environment. Okay, except for the robot. The robot we're not going to animate with the M. That's where we have the artistic control of it. Okay, so on this M, we have a bunch of attributes over here in the channel box. We don't need any of those attributes in the channel box. They're just wasting space. We're never going to animate this thing moving. Okay, the movement of this, the rotation of this, it's really irrelevant. Okay, we're never going to need to see it. So we're going to go with the M selected, go to Window, General Editor's Channel Control. Okay, and inside the channel control it says Keyable. We're going to highlight all the attributes in the Keyable slot and move them over to the non-keyable. Okay, so that just takes all those attributes out of the channel box. We're never going to move it, rotate it, or scale it. We don't care about them, so let's just get them out of there. As a rigger, this is one of the important tools because right away it allows the animator to see what can I do, what control do I have over this object. And if the thing isn't over here, they'll say, okay, I shouldn't move it or rotate it or scale it. Now we're not going to do this part, but there's also a locked area where I could go through and lock the translates, rotates, and scales. So even if they didn't have them here, they still couldn't do this. Okay? We don't want to do that. So I'm just going to close this now. So now that that's closed, we're going to create a couple attributes for this thing to control different items. So if we look at this, there's lights here, there's a door, there's an access panel, there are lights on the inside, and there's the motor and stuff down here, which we'll not get to today. We'll get to that a different day. Okay, so today our goal is just to set up the lights, set up the door, set up the access panel, and set up, and one more thing. Oh, there's another plate in here that also has lights up top that's just not shown right now. It's right here. This thing also has a light on it. Okay, so we're first going to go with the door and set the door up. Okay, so we're going to go back to the M, if you clicked off of it, and we're going to add some attributes. So under Modify, Add Attribute. Now inside here, we're creating our own attribute that we can edit and manipulate and control and do different things to. We can set limits to it, and we can just leave it wide open. Most of the time you want to set a limit to it, okay? Especially for something like the door open. The door is going to start here and end here, so there isn't going to be anything outside that box. It's like I said, it's a straight animation. So our first one that we're going to do, and I like to do these in the order that we would be animating them in, okay? So the first one that we're going to animate are the exterior lights. So I'm going to make one called exterior lights. Now you name these specifically lowercase, first word, uppercase, first letter of the second word, okay?
No spaces?
No spaces. For the data type, it wants to know what kind of data we're dealing with. A vector number is a 3-digit number. So if I was to give this an XYZ or an RGB value, that would be vector. Okay? So when you're in the hypershade and you have a Boolean and it has a color swatch, that color swatch is actually a number and it's a vector number. We have integer, which is a whole number. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to something crazy. Okay? It's no decimals at all. There's string, which is it's words. So if I wanted to make something that said ball or cat or dog, I could do that. We'll get into why you would use those later. There's enum, which I believe is a list of things. There's Booleans, which is true or false, yes or no, on or off. So like the visibility is on or off on an object, that's where we would change that. Or we could set something up like that. Okay? Go ahead. You could do them on and off. Okay, we don't want to do just on and off though. We want to actually fade them on. Okay? And the last one, which is the one you'll use most, which is float. Okay? That's basically any number, negative or positive. It can be a decimal, it can be whatever. Okay? So we're clicking float. And then we're going to set up our minimum and maximum and our default values. Okay? This is, you have an attribute called exterior lights. What is the lowest you want someone to be able to go? What's the highest you want someone to be able to go? And then what's the default value? The lowest for a light, for my thought process, should be 0. Okay, it can't suck any light out of the scene. And then the highest for it, we could put 1 in here. Okay, and that would kind of make sense. 0 is off, 1 is on, and then that would kind of make sense. But we don't have a whole lot of playroom between 0 and 1. Okay. Typically, we'll go from 0 to 10, and that gives us a little bit of playroom. All right, so for most of your minimums and maximums, that's going to be what you're going to set, 0 and 10. Or sometimes, like when we do the fingers, we're going to set a, look at my finger here, I can go this way to a positive 10 to curl my fingers in, or I can go this way to 0 or back even a little bit, or if I push them back, I can go to negative 10, okay? So sometimes we'll go to negative, but for something like lights, 0, 10. Yes, ma'am?
So basically when you're animating the things like this, and you can use a numeric value to determine the stretch or the length of their movement.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and that's what we're doing, is we're basically setting up keyframes, and we're using these numbers here to set up those ranges and set up the depth of them, okay? So 0, 10, and then the default is just going to be 0. Okay, we'll just set 0, 10, 0. Most of your objects are going to be like that. Okay, so I'm going to hit add, not OK. Okay, then what we can see is over in the channel box, it says exterior lights. Now you'll notice that it says on mine, if yours didn't do this, then you typed it wrong, but mine says capital exterior, capital lights. Okay, not all caps, but the first letter. If I had named it differently, if I didn't use that kind of lowercase, uppercase, camel case connotation, it wouldn't name it as nicely as it did here. Okay, so it gives you different kinds of names. It's not doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that it's not going to be displayed nicely, which is what we want to do. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the access panel opening. So we'll come in here and say access panel. Okay, same float, 0, 10, 0. And then we'll hit add. And the same thing, access is all lowercase, and the P of panel is uppercase. Okay, so the first thing, the lights are going to come on. The access panel is going to open. And then the digits are going to get pushed. Okay, so this is going to be digits pressed. Lowercase d.
Digits pressed?
Yes. Okay, now this one's going to be a little bit different. Because we have several digits that are getting pushed, I don't want to do 0 to 10, okay? If we have, we're going to say 6 digits is what are going to be pushed. So we're going to go, not 0 to 6, we're going to go 0 to 60, okay? And each button press is going to be 10 units. And then default is 0. So digits pressed, 0, 60, 0, add. Okay. Once the digits get pressed, the mechanics of the door are going to start working. So I'm just going to call one door mechanics. 0. Let's do this one at 30 and 0. The bigger the number there, the more refinement, the more movement we have inside that area. Because the door mechanics are such a, there's so much stuff going on, I want to make sure that I have enough things moving. Okay, so we have the exterior lights are going to come on. The access panel is going to flip open. The buttons are going to get pushed. The door mechanics are going to go on, which opens up this sliding door. So that's actually part of the door mechanics, is this thing sliding open. And then we're going to have top lights, 0, 10, 0. And vertical lights, 0, 10, 0. Environment. All right, so now we can close the add attributes. Okay, we're not done with it forever. We're just done with it for this attribute or this object today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to animate the exterior lights. So what we want to do is we're going to go to the animation menu. And under Animate, we're going to go to Set Driven Key, Set. This box is going to drive you crazy, okay? This is a way for us to control one object with another object. Okay, the advanced area way at the bottom of light tube, there's an additional color. This is where that intensity is coming from to make this thing glow. But you see there's a little arrow here. We're going to click on that arrow. Okay? This is actually where that's coming from. Okay? I'll go back to here. Down in advanced. Down in additional color, there's an arrow. Okay, so now this is actually where the intensity of that light's coming from. This is where the glow is coming from. Now there's not just one attribute inside here that we are dealing with. There's actually 3 attributes that we're dealing with. Okay? There's an intensity, there's a final gather contribution, and there's a reflection contribution. So we're going to keyframe all 3 of these things to go up. I've already set the intensity and the final gather contribution to be about what we want them to be. Okay? So what we're going to do is we need to load this guy into our driven. Okay? Our M master control is going to be controlled by, or is going to be controlling these 3 attributes right here. Okay? So we have to load it. Now right now, even though this is in the attribute editor, it's not selected. That's why they created this fancy button on the bottom that says select. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt. How did you get the display and the exterior lights selected? I thought I'd gotten that, but I don't.
Where?
In the lower portion, on the right there. The
Here?
exterior lights, no.
This?
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. That has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
That's just my layers there.
Did you put 5 in those boxes?
What was that?
Did you put 5 in those boxes?
Here?
Yeah.
No, that's the way it was. 0.5, 3, and 0. If it's not, no big deal, because we're going to change them in a second anyway. Okay? So we're going to click the select button down here. And that should select our exterior lights Mia light surface. And if you look over here in my channel box, that's what mine says, exterior lights, whatever, whatever. Okay? So we're going to load that into our driven area. So now that's in our driven.
Wait a minute, how did you load it?
See where it says load? Okay, so now what this is going to let us do is just set up a control to say what object is controlling what object. Right now it's set up that the master control environment, this M is controlling the intensity and reflection and final gather contributions of these. That connection has not been made yet. We have to tell it what we want those values to be. So I'm going to go to exterior lights up here in my top one. And then I'm going to highlight intensity, final gather contribution, and reflection contribution in the bottom one. Okay, so top one says master control environment, exterior lights. Bottom one, exterior light surface, intensity, FG contrib, reflection contrib. Everyone is good so far? Good. Okay. So now we have to basically set up our values. So it doesn't matter where you do this. You can do this in the channel box. You can do it in the attribute editor or wherever. I'm going to click on my master control environment. And you'll see that in my attribute editor, these things don't just show up inside here. Okay? My attributes that I've created here don't show up over here. I have to go to this tab in the attribute editor and down to extra tabs, and then I can actually see them. Okay? So I want to make sure that my exterior lights are set to 0, which they are. Okay? No big deal there. They should already be set to 0. I'm going to click on, in my set driven window, my light surface and reset the intensity to 0, the final gather contribution to 0, and my reflection contribution to 0. Okay, so intensity, FG, and reflection should all be 0. Yes, sir. Sometimes as we select stuff over here and we start playing back and forth, that stuff gets deselected in here. Okay? So we always have to make sure that we repick what we are doing or what we're controlling. So I always make sure that I re-click exterior lights here, and then my 3 attributes I'm controlling down there. Okay, they got deselected, I reselect them. I've set my exterior lights here to 0. I've set all 3 of these guys to 0. So now I'm ready to set my first set driven key. So I hit key. Okay. This is different than hitting S to set a key because that's an animation one. This is a rigging key. Okay. So now these things turn a salmon color, meaning they have some sort of connection to them. So now I have to go back to my driver and change my exterior lights to 10. So I go back to my master control environment, set my exterior lights to 10. Okay, and then I'm going to set up what I want my exterior light Mia surface to look like.
Where are you setting it?
You can either set it here in the channel box, exterior lights, or you can set it in your attribute editor right there. Either one works.
Where in the attribute?
Under the main curve, scroll all the way down to extra attributes. Right there, you have it open down the bottom.
Down here?
Yep.
Goes to 10?
We're going to go back to the Mia light surface and set our intensity to 0.5, our FG contribution to 3, and our reflection contribution to 1. Okay? So you click back on here, 0.5, 3, and 1. And then when you have that, then you hit key again. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we want to test this out. Now I'm going to show you, don't do this part. If I click on the master control and I go and set this to 0 and I set this to 10, you're not really seeing a huge difference in my scene. This is controlling the light's intensity. I can't see these changes until I render it out. Okay? But we know that if those values were changing as we change this number, then we know that it's working. Okay? So what we're going to do is with this exterior lights Mia surface selected, we're going to click on the copy tab. If you've never used the copy tab, it's great because it just copies the tab and throws it off to the side. So hit copy tab so you just have an extra tab there. Okay? Now this allows us to keep this set of attributes just loaded off to the side. Now we can click back on our master controller and play with that slider and watch the other sliders go up and down. Now we know that it worked. Okay, so now we've created our very first control for our scene. And just by adjusting this, you see how we're able to control 3 different attributes. So as an animator, I'm able to go in there and say, okay, well, I know I need those lights to come up. I don't know what values they need to come up because I'm not a renderer. I don't know what I should set, you know. Most animators, if they're in animation, they're just animators, okay? They don't know about rendering or modeling or even some rigging stuff they don't even know, okay? So it's basically dummy proof. So you just come in here and slide it from 0 to 10, and then they can see it. Okay. Okay, so that's our first one that we've set. Now I'm going to show that if I go into the graph editor, you're not going to do this part, I'm just going to show you. If I go in the graph editor, we actually have curves that are adjusting in here too. So if we decided that we don't like how it's kind of slow at the beginning, fast, and then slow, we could take these and make these linear, and now we're good. Okay? Now actually we are going to do that because we need to do that for another reason that we'll get to later. So, what was that? Yeah, we're going to make them linear. So we're going to click on our light surface, go to the graph editor, and just make them linear. All right, now the reason that we want to make these linear as opposed to keeping them flat is if the animator comes in and they say, I really don't like how it's light at the beginning or slow at the beginning, fast, and then slow again, I want to adjust that. Their graph is going to be different. So you're basically like, they might have a graph that goes like this in order to counteract your graph that's going down like this, okay? So if we make it linear, then they can do all the adjustments later on, okay? So some things will have nice and slow, some things will have later on.
They can't make it linear themselves like we just did?
They'd have to figure out where it is that we controlled it and then do that, okay? Right, and they don't know how to do that.
I know at CCS they don't teach rigging, they just teach animation.
Right, and there's a lot of places, like I said, they're just, the animators are animators, and the rigging is one of those things that there's not a lot of people that do it because it's such a technical and artistic thing. You have to really understand how the body moves and then be able to apply that and make it still look good and still look the desired movement that you're trying to get from it. All right, so that's our first one that we're going to do. So we can close like half of these windows that we have open and just reopen them again. Okay. So that was our first one. We took the M and we animated it so that these light bulbs, all we have to do is click on the M, and we have a little controller right here that we can adjust for those, or in the attribute editor right here that we can adjust.
Oh, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
This is all for that Mia shader.
For that Mia shader.
We had other lights, well, the same lights, but we had different shader on some of those lights. We have to tie those to that.
Correct.
And could we do it through the same exterior lights?
Yes, I could have every single thing controlled by this. I could have in this exterior lights, I could have the lights turn on, the access panel open, all the buttons hit, all the door mechanics work, all the top lights go on, all the exterior lights go on, or interior lights go on, all from one if I really wanted to, but then it's really hard to animate after that, okay? If I decide later I want to take this and give it just a little bit of a, kind of like a fade down and then pop back up again, I can't do that if everything is tied into that same area, okay? So I keep everything kind of together that makes sense to keep it together. All right, so now the next one we're going to do is this little door panel here. And then we're just going to do the door panel coming up, and then we'll just do the door panel coming up today, okay? And then we'll make it an easy day today. All right, so now we're going to take the door panel, and we're going to go in the attribute editor, and this is going to be animating this access panel's translate Y, okay? First step of rigging is you just kind of figure out what it is we're trying to move and how we're trying to move it, and just make sure that it makes sense, okay? If this thing was on some crazy angle and I tried to move it and I just wanted it to go kind of like back and in, obviously animating just the translate Y here isn't going to work. I would have to do the Y and the Z in order to get that kind of sliding motion. Okay, so we know it's the access panel and we know that it just wants to slide up. That's what this access panel is going to be doing. Okay, so let's go to the animate menu, set driven key, set. And we're going to load our M, whatever your letter is, load that as the driver, grab the access panel and load that as our driven.
Where did you grab it? I'm gonna watch it.
We grab what?
The access panel.
Just click right here.
Oh, you click on it.
Yeah, just click right on it. The access panel, we're animating specifically that object. There's no, like we had to do on the lights, we don't have to dig deep down to find that attribute. It's literally just right there. We're going to be controlling the access panel and the translate Y. The access panel is going to drive the translate Y movement of this object. So when we edit this access panel's controller attribute here, that's going to drive that thing to come up. Okay? That's what that's going to do, is just move that thing up. Okay? So this thing should already be set up. My access panel is closed. Unless I was playing around with my digits on my master controller, those should all be 0 still. So I can hit key. Okay? So when my master control access panel is set to 0, my access panel is right here. Now I'm going to click on my master controller and set the access panel to 10. Yes, 10. And then I'm going to take my access panel. All right, this is one that you guys can actually test and make sure that it works. If you click on your master control, now the attribute editor is nice because you get a slider. And if you're not comfortable using the virtual slider by clicking on this and middle mouse button dragging, see, I didn't do it right. Set that to 0. I got distracted. I'm going to blame it on you guys.
Hey, look at distraction.
Set that to 10. Scoot this up. Key. There we go. Okay. So if you're not comfortable clicking on the attribute here and using the middle mouse button over there, you can go to the attribute editor and just use the slider here. Okay. But now you can test that out to see how that's looking. Okay. And then make sure, too, that you click on the access panel, go in the graph editor, and make sure that that is linear. Okay, for the same reasons that we had the other one. All right, so now from one spot, we have the ability to control 2 objects. That's not a huge deal, but once we get done with this, you'll see how many different things that we can use to create controls for all these different things. The buttons being pressed is going to be a huge one because not only do we have these buttons being pressed, but there's also, if I go to my material, there's also a screen in here. There it is. And the screen is actually animated so that, come on, just show it. There we go, to get rid of the glare. So as we're putting numbers in here, that we can actually have these little asterisks also pop in. Okay, so like someone's typing it in. Okay, don't worry where I'm at. I'm just showing for future reference. Okay. All right, so we can also, as we're punching these numbers in, we're also going to be animating this texture in there. So this is something where now we're getting into something a bit more complex than just finding one thing and then animating that one thing. When we do these buttons in here, between now and next class, just think of a 6-digit number you want to punch in for your code. I don't care what it is. There's a couple extra funny characters in here too. But it's going to be animating these things, punching in one at a time. And every time the button goes in, the texture is going to change to that next texture thing. Okay? And then eventually we'll do the door stuff and the rest of it. Okay? Now the door, when we get to this part, we're not going to be simply doing, one controller and having that thing control every single one of these things. Okay? That would be kind of overkill into what we're doing. This is a piece of machinery. That's all this is. So what I need to do is figure out what drives this machine use my set driven to control that one object, and then that object that's driving the rest of the machine is going to be controlling the rest of the machine. What I mean by that is, whoops, let me turn this off, this off, this off, this off. And then that, there we go. So what I mean by that is that this piston here, that's going to be my main controlling driving element, okay? As this thing comes out and goes in, comes out and goes in, that's going to turn this wheel. As this wheel turns, it's going to turn this wheel the opposite direction. As that turns, it's going to turn this wheel. And as that turns, it's going to turn this wheel. And then as this thing turns like this, it's going to turn all this stuff like that. Oops, not like that, like this. This thing turns. And as this turns, it's going to push this thing down. Okay? And then that's going to push that thing down. All right? So we're going to actually look at this in a mechanical way, break it down mechanically, and then create these things to control what they're going to be controlling. This gear is going to control this thing spinning. This gear is going to control this thing spinning. This gear is going to control this thing. Okay? I actually don't use the piston because it's hard to use the piston to control stuff. I'll use this guy and fake it so it looks like the piston is. Okay?
So for the gears that are next to each other, they're just like rotating from two different controllers. We're not doing like collisions or anything.
We're not doing collisions, no. It's totally going to be animated. It's going to be totally set up and rigged like that. Okay? But this is how these things get set up. You kind of build upon these animations or rigs, and then that final attribute looks like an orchestra being created because you have so many things kind of going on at once. Just that one little slider that we're going to create is going to create so much stuff going on as far as these little glow things coming down and going into the box, and then these things kind of chugging along, and then our door sliding open. Okay? It's going to be very cool once it's done. But it's obviously we have to just get to that point of it being done. Okay?